Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. It is Super Week here at the Hearthstone Collegiate Training Grounds. I'm Nathan Zamora, joined today by Kevin Havestad. How are you doing today, Kevin?
I'm really good, Nathan. I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. It's going to be a great broadcast. I'm looking forward to seeing some phenomenal play from some of the best collegiate teams that have been competing in this event to date.
That's right. Every team today that's going to be playing has locked up their playoff spot 4-0 so far through the week. So I'm really looking forward to some of the cool matches that we have today. But if this is your first time joining us, let's talk about the rules here for the Collegiate Training Grounds and exactly how they'll be playing. Teams are split into regional groups, north, south, east, and west. Those teams will collaborate with each other to take on players every single week in one match where they'll submit 4 unique classes. To get to that regional playoff stage we were just talking about, teams need to have at least 4 wins, so a 4-2 or better record. From there, they'll play in that single elimination playoff bracket where a champion of each region will be crowned, and then they'll head to that land finals and compete for their share of $50,000 in scholarships.
That's right, Nathan. And everyone competing today here is already 4-0, so they've already got a playoff spot. We're just looking to see how they're going to seed into the playoffs moving forward. That $50,000 in scholarship prizing is looking really, really good. But we need to talk as well a little bit about the actual game format.
Yes, exactly. Conquest is exactly how they'll be playing. Even though they'll be playing in teams, it's just how you know it. Each week, they'll submit 4 unique classes. Then from there, they'll decide which one of their classes they do not want to play in this week. It is a self-ban format. From there, they'll play a best-of-5 match where they'll need to win a game with each of their decks in order to win the series.
And as always, being Conquest format, as soon as they have won with a given deck, they have to retire it and cannot reuse it. So they've got a chance for 1 win with each class that they've brought after choosing which of their own classes they're not going to be playing.
That's right. And let's take a look at the schedule and see who's going to be playing today. There are 2 days of play coming up, but here's Monday's schedule. First, we're going to have the University of Central Florida taking on Duke University, or we'll head over to the University of Connecticut facing off versus St. John's University. And to round out the day, it's the University of British Columbia taking on the Academy of Art University.
And I got to say, I'm really happy, Nathan, that I get to be here to cast a couple of Canadian colleges that are going to be showing up on stream this afternoon.
That's right. You're from Saskatchewan.
Yeah, and I hear you have a story for us about that lovely name.
Unfortunately, yeah, I do. My very first and only spelling bee ever, my first word was Saskatchewan. And I failed miserably, as I said Saskatchewan. Didn't know I'd have to spell Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan.
Yeah,
crazy.
It's not a fun word to have to spell. I understand your pain.
Imagine when you're writing your address, you just hate it.
It's just SK at that point, yeah.
Oh, God, why didn't I think of that? I should have done that for the spelling bee. Let's take a look at the South, where we'll be heading over first. You can get a closer breakdown of exactly how that's working out. Nice place to visit right now because the weather's starting to cool off, but there you can see teams that have started to separate themselves from the pack.
Yeah, and so we are going to see a couple of these teams today, Duke and Central Florida. Interesting to note, though, UT Dallas with a flawless record.
Yes, 12-0 on games after 4 weeks. That is just an incredible performance thus far.
Yeah, I don't even know how that's possible, honestly. It's just I'm going to have to go back and watch those with a little more specificity because that's incredible.
It's a lot of totem golems.
It's probably exactly what it is.
Probably coming into play with that one. But yeah, these guys all have been putting up great records. You can see Georgia Tech, of course, some of the weeks in week number 1, for instance, the brackets weren't panning out exactly how they were. So some teams ended up getting some buys. Georgia Tech, of course, that's one of those. That is not a miscount. They got to one of their matches in the bye, and that's just part of card games. When you're having Swiss formats like the Tespa one has, that's super cool because Swiss is a much more even playing field. It makes everything so much better from the player perspectives. It's a lot about who can win X out of Y rounds, not so much as can you beat any team on any given day.
Right, and I know we talked a little bit about this before the show, but it's also interesting to note that these teams are now going to be able to go back and review footage from BlizzCon. We're coming hot off the heels of the Hearthstone World Championship, and I do think that these guys competing for scholarship money have probably taken the time to review those plays and those deck lists.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anytime you have a chance to look at that, we'll get to that a little bit later as we go into the setup, but that is something I definitely want to talk about is what just happened there. So if you're looking for more information about some stuff or you want to show your school spirit, you can absolutely do that. Check us out on Facebook, or you can tweet at Team Tespa. And if you're looking to compete in some of the upcoming Tespa stuff, there's a lot going on, with Heroes of the Dorm, with the Tespa pack, with the Tespa Hearthstone that happened at PAX South. Tespa's giving away like $1 million in scholarships. There's always opportunities coming up. If you want more information about that, check out tespa.org. But our first match, it's a really good point you just mentioned with the Hearthstone World Championships. These guys are not seasoned Championship Tour professionals. These guys are full-time students that are taking on the task of competing on top of that.
Right, and they do have to worry about this on top of that full course load. So they're doing what they can to study, to practice, to train, not only for Hearthstone, but also for college. So it's going to be interesting to see how these matches play out today. I am super excited to see Central Florida brought Priest.
Yeah, Priest actually made it through the top 8 at the World Championships. Hamster was piloting a Priest build that was very aggressively fighting against control builds. And when I say very aggressively, what I mean is lots of high-end cards that have super late-game impact against decks that will pressure them. Let's take a look at Central Florida a little bit closer first. There you see Brownie, Aranor, and damn it, Danny. Economics, neuropsychology, and business administration. To me, this is like the total package for a Hearthstone team where the majors are concerned.
Yeah, it's funny to see you've got somebody who's going to know the math, someone who's going to know the ins and outs of how to think about player psychology and the mindset that everyone's going into this with, and a business admin major who definitely has done all of the research to know exactly who they're going up against.
Well, I mean, for 4-0, I imagine there's some research. Oh, that guy's ready to game. Is that a tattoo?
That's hard to tell. I don't know. That could just be. It's got to be a tattoo.
If that's just really elaborate chest hair, I know exactly.
Even better.
I know exactly how that works. It's just I'm not gonna. I guess I won't go into more description about that. I'll let you guys work with your imagination. You're welcome. Let's go ahead and take a look at Duke, and there you can see it. Dark Duke, TD Shoe, and Noodle Lady. Public policy and political science. He looks like a politician. It's a very nice tie. Biology and computer science. Not quite the same, but again, a very well-rounded team of majors here.
Yeah, and very diverse. Again, you've got a public policy major, somebody who's going to really understand the idea of how to think about the total package and planning ahead. Somebody who's a biology major and really will understand probably a lot of
precautions.
They'll be really good at playing Druid. And a comp sci major who also is going to be someone who will understand the ins and outs and intricacies of interactions and mechanics. And these guys are having way more fun.
Yeah, she just had some noodles, guaranteed. Guaranteed. I'd be that happy if I had noodles too. Look at that American flag on that shirt too. That guy knows what's up.
They look really excited to get into this.
If I looked that slick in those glasses, I'd wear them. I really would.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to get you a pair of those actually.
Well, you've never seen me in glasses. That's sort of the issue. Like my head, I suffer from. Oh yeah, school spirit. Yeah, buddy. I suffer from a condition called cantaloupe head, where it is perfectly spherical and very awkward looking.
It doesn't seem that bad, but it sounds serious. I mean,
it doesn't.
You might want to get
that's
checked
the thing.
out.
The beard, it looks like I have a chin, but there's no behind the beard. There's only another beard. There's no chin behind it.
Beards within beards, man. It's it's the right way to go.
Beardception. And there you can see the self-bans that have taken place. Central Florida has actually left up a priest. Self-banned the shaman. So here's the deal with this. I feel like that shaman at the World Championships was very much targeted by Facehunter a lot with these secret builds that are coming in. You're thinking cat tricks and explosive traps and freezing traps, trying to get large tempo plays. We saw Chansu actually taking a healing wave into his mid-range shaman build to fight against that particular thing. Warlock also is really well positioned versus shaman right now, and so when they see Warlock and they see Hunter in here and they see the Warrior, they don't know where the self-ban's headed here. So I don't mind self-banning the Shaman just because it's very possible that 3 decks here are built at trying to have an edge against it. But there's a Priest in this one. And honestly, Kevin, I got to be a little concerned.
Well, Priest, I think, though, is actually going to be an okay thing to run here. I mean, you know right away that multiple of these classes are going to be board-centric, and that's going to be favorable for Priest in a lot of cases. And now we also know that it's a Dragon Priest, so there's going to be lots of early game. I'm astonished to see that Mass Dispel in the mulligan.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting one. I'm curious to see how that actually functions. You know, that's a card that versus Shaman at times can have some real potential. We're talking wiping out Taunt Totems and leaving them stranded alongside Flame Tongue Totems and Manatide Totems. Just it's one of those cards that at times it's going to look like it is so good, or you're going to wonder how on earth Mass Dispel made its way into the list. That is a very feast or famine style card. It's not really flexible.
Right, and in the Hunter matchup, it's going to be probably more difficult to get value off of it because it's not going to have as many viable targets. It's not going to do the same amount of work because you're really not going to prevent any damage from the Hunter's board.
Yeah, it's very difficult to use. So here we go. That is a Leroy in the opening hand for Duke alongside Explosive Trap. So I think the plan for them is spelled out. Savannah Highmane is very likely to be the actual top end of the build where you'll see them try to get off to a blistering fast start. Now this hand is not giving them that. And if the deck is dedicated to being one of those very fast starts, this turn 1 Twilight Elf could give them a nightmare.
Right, so if they're playing sort of a hybrid style where they've got the aggressive, damage-oriented build that you see with the Explosive Trap, with the Leroy, they really want to be pushing as much damage as possible. They can't waste resources on contesting the early board.
Right, Eaglehorn Bow is okay for that, but outside of that, this deck basically needs early game stuff to get going. Now, nothing really matches up well versus Twilight Whelp, though. So I'm actually curious if them not having an early drop could be a little bit more beneficial, both for concealing what their actual game plan is, and also because the Twilight Whelp is very likely to just contest whatever hits.
Right, and it's worth noting as well here that Duke might have had more opportunity had they opened with the coin, but in this situation, Central Florida's off to a really strong start, and even the Shadow Word Horror tech, like this deck is built 100% to contest exactly the kind of deck that Duke brought to the table.
Yeah, Shadow Word Horror certainly is an interesting tech choice versus Shaman, for instance. Take out Flametongue Totem, take out all the regular totems, even if it's buffed. I mean, that's a card that has not seen play, as far as I can remember, at all in competitive. Like, through 3 Hearthstone Championship seasons, we're talking Asia Pacific, EU, the Americas. I don't think I've ever seen that card make its play.
No, I mean, traditionally in Dragon Priest, you would run Holy Nova because you don't want to do Excavated Evil, you don't want to do damage to your own minions. It's important for you to retain your own board presence. So you often are looking for the Holy Nova to help out with an existing Twilight Guardian and also deal damage to your opponent's board. In this situation, they've got very, very specific targeted removal that will only deal with their opponent's minions.
Yeah, really interesting choice. I'm curious to see how this is going to work. First thing Duke's got to take care of, though, is this Twilight Guardian. This is the card that makes this matchup very winnable, is when you land it. And there's not a ton of board presence to just automatically contest it. Freezing Trap, certainly a great pickup to help handle this, but Central Florida easily going to sniff that out.
Right, and it is nice to note here that this is a good opportunity for Duke to get some board presence. If they choose to go for the Cloaked Huntress, they can play one or more of these traps. It's going to give them an opportunity to maybe hide a little bit of what the tech choice is. Obviously, Florida is going to play around freezing. They're going to be expecting that, right?
Yeah.
But the freezing trap is a tech that is designed to help them with exactly this situation where they're staring down a taunt that they can't answer. I think in this situation, if you're Duke, you have to play the Cloaked Huntress and probably value the Explosive Trap.
Come midnight.
Yeah, I'm really curious how this is going to end up panning out, because the problem with handling the single threat with Freezing Trap is that this one's okay with just sitting there. This one's okay with standing still. But Central Florida, more importantly, this is a dead turn for them. They have 0 playable cards in hand right now.
Right, and knowing that they're going to play around Freezing Trap, really no action available to them whatsoever. And you want to sit back, having coined out the Twilight Guardian. Ideally, what they would love to do here is, if this was an on-curve play, be able to play that Azure Drake and pick it up with the Freezing Trap. They're going to have to wait a full turn to even have that opportunity, and Duke is going to, behind this, be able to slam down maybe the Animal Companion, maybe whatever comes off the top of the deck.
Yeah, this is, honestly, Duke, despite the shaky early start, this is my concern with Priest, is that if Priest does not have a lot of strong turns, doesn't come from behind all that well. It does a really good job of kind of staying ahead once it's there. But staying ahead means playing cards.
Right, and unfortunately for Duke, as the bigger threats start to come down, we know already.
Oh no, that is a disaster for Central Florida. With them missing the actual turn here, they decide that they are very likely to lose the game if this is a Freezing Trap anyway. So they're taking this attack right now in the off chance it is not a Freezing Trap and getting something in the meantime. The fact that it's Freezing Trap now, they're very far behind.
Right, they've been punished extensively. You can see it on their faces. They were hoping actively that they had seen through that as a facade. That wasn't actually the play, and they were going to just trigger the Explosive Trap. Now they're in a really scary position where they've given up the additional charge on the Eaglehorn Bow, they've given up board presence, and their play next turn isn't going to be cleanly removing the Cloaked Huntress, which is now a really scary problem.
Now, honestly, though, I do want to say this. I have to give credit to Central Florida here for making a play like that. When you're so far behind that you have to take long shot odds in order to get there, that's one of those situations where getting some value out of your card is necessary. Central Florida recognized that missing the drop, that was the risk they had to take. And however little the success rate's going to be, when it succeeds, that's what they have to take. It's honestly a good job to Central Florida.
Right. They made a difficult but necessary decision in that situation. And now they're trapped in a position where if they're thinking ahead to the risk of a Savannah High main on 6, they have to worry about having Entomb ready, but that doesn't actually help them to get back into this game. The next several turns, they're going to be playing from behind for quite a while.
Yeah, the other thing to note here is the way that Duke has placed the traps. The fact that they went for the freezing trap and then delayed the explosive trap, and now the explosive trap's come down, Duke can't play 2 freezing traps at the same time. The fact that they delayed the explosive trap makes it look like it's a second freezing trap or a snipe in this situation. Very rarely is it going to be snake trap. Very rarely is it going to be explosive trap. Central Florida now knows it's not snipe. They almost certainly read this as freezing trap right now, but will likely be forced into a similar situation.
Right, and Duke obviously going to attempt to telegraph freezing trap here by not doing anything to trade with the Azure Drake.
Whoa, an animal companion over Savannah High main. That is really interesting from Duke here. I'm curious where this leads. I mean, this looks to me like slam the High main all day, every day.
You know, I think this honestly is just playing around the Entomb. This does give them the opportunity for the most damage this turn. In 2 out of the 3 situations when the Animal Companion comes down, it's going to put up an enormous board that they are reasonably confident Central Florida can't remove. And at this point, I think they just are looking to close this game out in the next 2 to 3 turns.
Yeah, you gotta go ahead and trade off the Barns here in fear of likely Excavated Evil. With the Azure Drake down, that would deal 4 damage across the board, so I think good on Duke to hedge their bets against that. But now Central Florida with a handful of basically duds at this point. I mean, the Shadow Word Horror looks like it's good, but this is going to leave 7 power on board, and they're at 16.
Right, so they're in a position now, unfortunately, where they are actually being threatened by 9 available damage with the Leroy and the Hero Power.
1 off lethal for Duke right now.
They're 1 away from doing lethal damage here, and there's really nothing that Central Florida can do with what they have in hand to answer that next turn.
Yeah, a lot of this came down to just the hand size at the start. You know, having Ragnaros and Ysera in the deck, I think that's very likely where the top end caps. They had them both very early on. Entomb, obviously not a very effective answer to early game pressure. So Duke just keeping the pressure on, do what Hunter does.
Yeah,
playing Hunter cards and swinging with Eagle Horn bows.
You were right earlier, right? They took the risk with the Twilight Guardian, hoping to trigger an explosive and not a freezing, and the whole game really circles back to that.
Yeah. Now, if they'd held it, I'm not actually sure they come out ahead still. I mean, the Cloaked Huntress is still kind of threatening the Twilight Guardian. Just 2 attacks from it will clear it out, and they get to keep the pressure afterwards.
And in either case, you also give up the additional charge on the Eagle Horn bow, which means they've been giving additional damage and additional removal back to the Hunter.
Yep. Lots to think about here. Bran, cool card, but not enough to get the job done. This will be going over to Duke. Leroy Jenkins in hand, a 1-0 lead for Duke at this point. But, you know, looking at the build, I'm not necessarily worried for Central Florida here. I feel like the Priest build is supposed to have some game against Hunter, but for the most part is going to be more focused towards Shaman, more focused towards Zoo Warlock. Hunter, Shadow Word Horror, Master Spell, they don't line up very well versus that deck.
Right, and in his position now, you also have to think Hunter is off the board, right? You don't have to worry about the Hunter anymore from Duke. So if you're Central Florida, you can now think, honestly, you have the Priest available to answer something like the Warlock, and you're not going to be playing into that very, very aggressive Hunter, which is probably the most difficult matchup they had.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Hunter actually is, it's kind of funny because Hunter's in a weird spot right now. On ladder, I don't feel like it's that strong of a deck because there's so many Shamans, and the Hunter builds can really struggle against Shamans at times. But versus everything else, Hunter's pretty gosh darn strong right now. Honestly, it's a really good tournament deck. So when you look at ladder results, and if you've been playing and practicing there to try to figure out what your decks are, you maybe haven't seen that many Hunters on ladder because, again, they struggle versus the Shamans. You've seen plenty of Shamans, though. Here, sure, you can only play against the Shaman 1 time if it wins. You only play against the Hunter 1 time if it wins. So I think I like the Hunter choice a lot here, and I think just getting a little bit punished.
Right, and traditionally, Priest is actually usually quite good at countering Hunter. The problem is that hybrid style of Hunter throws down so much aggressive damage, and the Priest player, given, like you said, the top-end early draw, they didn't have any of the answers they needed. They had all of those one-off tech choices, the Shadow Word Horror, the Master Spell. Like, we've already seen that they were targeting Shaman very openly.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't get the draw they wanted, so they hold on to that deck and hope to trade.
And you look at the lineup here, Central Florida's banned away their own Shaman.
Right. I mean, you have to wonder
did Duke just get got here? I'm sorry. Did Central Florida, did they just, I literally just read, ignore everything I just said. I literally just read the template wrong. It's been a long couple weeks for me. That is not an excuse, but ignore that. 3 decks to go. Priest is still one of them.
Priest is still one of them. And to give up Shaman into this lineup, I mean, mid-range Shaman against any of what you were going to see come out from Duke was probably going to be quite viable.
Yeah, this opening hand, much more something that Central Florida is looking for. You know, Twilight Whelp, of course, there, but Nether Spite Historian That's a card that is so good in Dragon Priest in particular, where it's playing a little bit slower of a game, and having dragons that can fill out your top end curve, honestly, I feel like is really important. The Ysera in Central Florida's build is a bit curious to me, alongside the Nether Spy Historian, though.
Right, and honestly here, Central Florida probably throws it away looking for an activator for the Twilight Whelp, given that they get to slam down that turn 1 Whelp.
I'm really curious about this. So there's kind of two ways that I look at it. Number one is Twilight Whelp will turn 1 on its own. Obviously, it's best with a dragon. So if they don't have a dragon for it, do they just delay that and go into the Nether Spy Historian? Because they kept Shadow Word Horror in the opening hand, so if the board is really strong early on, it doesn't necessarily get out of control. So I'm curious where their thought is, and that's exactly what they're going to do, is hold that Twilight Whelp, try to fill out the curve with Nether Spite Historian and go from there.
Right, and unfortunately that is going to be problematic for them now, as they are going to see an explosive opening here from Duke. Tunnel Trog available with both Feral Spirit and Barnes as follow-up coming up in the next couple of turns. There's going to be a lot of threats put down from Duke, and they're not all going to be cleanly answered by that Shadow Word Horror.
They're playing a mid-range Shaman build, but something that makes Shaman so strong is the ability to still have explosive openers with Tunnel Trog and Totem Golem, with Tunnel Trog and Feral Spirits, just Totem Golem in general. I'm curious to see if they're going to be that aggressive early on, because Central Florida, their turn 2 is fairly weak with the Nether Spy Historian. Is Duke going to smell that as weakness and try to strike right away?
Right, and Duke is now aware of the Shadow Word Horror. They're going to be playing around that possibility.
That's a really good point, actually.
So they can know right away that they don't necessarily want to be, for example, coining out Feral Spirit in this position, because the removal is something that they now know exists.
You know, that's a really interesting note to really take a look at. In game number 1, Central Florida, they were kind of out of the game on turn 5. Or, I'm sorry, on their turn 4, rather. Should they have even showed that Shadow Word Horror?
Yeah, they may not have wanted to admit that that was a tech choice that they had brought, because it is very specifically Shaman tech. They were targeting Shaman with that selection.
I mean, Duke knows that card's there. That can really influence their play.
Now, on the other hand, if they choose to go ahead here, if they coin out the Feral Spirit, it's going to be a full turn that they can utilize those Feral Spirits before Shadow Word Horror could come down, and it takes the Trog out of range.
Yeah, you're also, that's the big part there, is you're getting the buff for it. So I think I like the Feral Spirit here. It's just the hand texture for Duke is what, to me, makes this a little bit awkward, is that their turn 3 is pretty weak, but when your board is like this and you're rolling into Barnes in turn 4, I think it's justifiable.
Right, and you know right away for Duke that they've got a beautiful curve. Barnes, Thunderbluff Valiant, and Fire Elemental all available coming down as follow-up in the upcoming turns. They're not worried about rebuilding their board presence. Be interested to see here.
Shadow Word Horror all minions with 2 or less power?
I believe it is, yes.
So that'll actually take care of their own Twilight Whelp here as well.
Well, I assume they don't expect it to survive, and maybe they're not planning on playing into it here.
It's a possibility.
This is a tough position to be in for Central Florida, because, again, they've drawn into the early Chill Maw, which is very, very awkward to have in hand this early. Shadow Word Death not going to help them whatsoever unless this Tunnel Trog gets an additional buff, because nothing is coming out of the Shaman deck in the upcoming turn that's going to be a target for that.
Yeah, this is really unique. I mean, here's the deal. Shadow Word Horror obviously not at its most value at this point, especially now when you play the Twilight Whelp. But sometimes your opponent's plays are so strong, they kind of force your hand. And when I see that Feral Spirit, I'm curious if Central Florida, if they have time to craft a game plan that plays around it, or if they just literally have to go for it. This is a tough couple of turns that Central Florida's had.
Right. I mean, even if they decide to value Shadow Word Horror as an answer to, for example, a totem turn post Thunderbluff Valiant, and they play both of these Wormrest agents, they're going to be left in a position where that board is going to get cleared. They know, with even just the power on the board, that those minions are not surviving the upcoming turn.
Yeah, I think here their best option is just to go for the board tension, though. Like, if they don't get these Wormrest agents down, how on earth are they fighting back for this?
Right, if they don't contest the board here, they're not getting sufficient removal. The Shadow Word Horror can't be played because they won't clear the Tunnel Trog, and they'll lose their own Twilight Whelp.
Yeah.
So they're left in a position where they have no choice but to contest the board.
Yeah, they kind of played to this position with the extra power shield draw, is just to find Wormrest agent, to find Twilight Guardian, just anything to get something going.
And they are, I mean, in a way, thankful that they have the Chill Maw in hand, because it meant they had an activator.
Yeah, it's a scary card against Shaman for sure, due to the nature of Hex, but perhaps a necessary evil. And Duke, a lot of options in front of them here, and none of them look apparently strong. Like, if they play Feral Spirit or Lightning Storm obviously not doing a lot of work on this one. The Feral Spirit overloading you in turn 5, which turn 5 is, they'd love to just get the Harrison out of hand and onto the board, just get development going. If they play the Barnes here, their board is starting to become susceptible to what's happening.
Right. Either the Feral Spirit or the Lightning Storm would have guaranteed a board clear, but not a clean board clear. In this position, unfortunately, the best they can do is eliminate one of these Worm Rest agents. And that's kind of expensive.
I look at this and I wonder if it's even right to kill one of the Worm Rest agents here. Because now your opponent gets to attack back fairly efficiently here.
Yeah, I mean,
that's an interesting spot.
Depends on the removal that they're trying to play around, because they've made themselves extraordinarily vulnerable to, for example, a Holy Nova in this position.
Yeah.
Would clear the board and leave them with full power available.
Yeah,
and it is turn 5.
That's a really good thing to note there too, is if they forego the attack, the Holy Nova is super strong versus them. If they take the attack, Holy Nova's still good, but they got some value out of their minions. But when they attack, they're almost always giving Central Florida a better just on-board turn. And that is a really tough turn to think about.
It's an enormous risk against Priest is what it is. Duke has basically said, we do not believe you have Holy Nova in hand, and if you do, it's much the same as trying to play into that Freezing Trap was for Central Florida last game. They're saying, if you have this card available, we're in a very, very difficult position.
Yeah.
And Central Florida now, it's going to be very difficult to decide what their correct removal strategy is here. I believe they have to clear the Tunnel Trog. I think that's a huge priority for them in this position.
I definitely think Tunnel Trog is about as close to priority number 1 as it gets right now. And choosing to put excess damage on the Worm Rest agent here, I think this is a bit of a mistake, because now that 1/1 Totem Golem gets to trade over that and then have Barnes dictate a trade here, if they had put the extra damage on the Whelp and left 2 health on the Worm Rest agent here, they might have been able to actually get a Lightning Storm out of Duke this turn.
Right, it would actually have protected 1 additional minion or baited the Lightning Storm, either of which is really, really good for Central Florida with this board state, because again, they are protecting their own Shadow Word Horror. They have to wait for that card to be viable until they don't have so many of their own useful 2 or less power minions on the board.
Now that being said, they may want the attacks to happen as they picture them happening to plan for their future turns as well. This is the team format gives you such a different way to play the game. Like every single turn, someone on the team has an idea of how to take a turn, and it gets just so cool to watch them have so many different ways to play one board state.
Yeah,
it's rarely that way.
You definitely see Duke openly negotiating, even during Central Florida's turns. They're sitting there and they're actively strategizing. They're trying to decide how to play the follow-up. They've clearly talked through, you can tell they've talked through specifically the removal plays, because you do not throw a naked Thunderbluff Valiant down if you think your opponent has been hiding a Shadow Word Pain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this is influenced by the other Thunderbluff Valiant draw, but in this position, rolling into Central Florida's turn 6, you know, this is a turn where the Thunderbluff Valiant might be strong enough to pull an Entomb from the opponent. This might be a play that's so strong that they actually prompt an AoE spell from Central Florida, which offsets their development in this turn. There's a lot of things going into this. But yeah, there definitely is a nominal risk for a very high reward, and if it pays off here, it's going to pay off in spades.
Right. I mean, Duke, if they get to keep this, they've got an enormously powerful follow-up turn available to them. The Azure Drake pulling a Blackwing Technician is unfortunate because it doesn't do anything for them. It doesn't give them any follow-up opportunities, and to trade away both these Whelps, that's an expensive, expensive turn.
It certainly is, and Duke now with a lot of information about what's in Central Florida's hand, I think they can conclude that there's no AoE. I think it's very easy to conclude that there's not like something like Bookworm or Shadow Word Pain. At this point, Duke has to find just the best way to drive this board state home.
Right, now with that information, they've obviously got some very, very strong options here, and I don't think they're actually scared of this Azure Drake.
Oh, no.
Do you play the second Thunderbluff Valiant here?
That's a really risky one. I think second Thunderbluff Valiant here certainly can run away with the game, but then you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. You know, there's something to be said about playing around top decks. And that's clearly what's on their mind here with the Fire Elemental, is to go, hey, you know what? We have control of the game. They're going to have to draw some heat to get out of this one anyway. Let's just take it slow. We have Hex. We can easily grind this game home to victory.
Right, but at this point now, you can actually see a path back into the game for Central Florida. Shadow Word Death and just the Blackwing Technician alone puts them back on the board, back in the game, removes a massive threat, and we know that they've got still this Shadow Word Horror sitting in hand ready for when the Feral Spirit or the Totem turns start to take place.
Right.
They're not actually in a lot of danger of losing this game in any subsequent turns here.
Yeah. We got a battle on our hands, boys. And now, second Thunderbluff Valiant looks a little interesting.
I mean,
I have actually never seen this situation occur. Thunderbluff Valiant just always immediately dies, or the game ends when it happens. It's very rare that the tempo one succeeds to this point, but in a priest game, that's definitely where it can happen.
Right, and Duke has been in this position up to this point in the game, basically able to make big, strong, swingy plays every turn, so their thing from below is hardly discounted at all, which means this is basically the only organic follow-up they had available.
Now, that is a 4-power healing totem. And not quite out of the range of this Blackwing Technician, and now on 8 mana, I imagine Central Florida is playing Big Papa. It's Ragnaros, and there is one target in particular, Kevin, that is incredibly good right now.
And it's not going to be the right one. That's so unfortunate.
That is horrible for them. For those of you who don't know, that was it. Was definitely sarcastic. They needed to hit a minion here. Now their board is very threatened, and the Thunderbluff Valiant is threatening taking complete control.
Now, if you're Duke here, though, you do have an interesting and somewhat difficult decision around how to value this Hex. You do technically have the ability with the power on the board, the removal spells in hand, and your hero power alone to take care of this board without having to utilize the Hex. Given that you know it's Dragon Priest and you know there's likely to be at least one top-end dragon. They've never seen the Chillmaw, they've never seen the Ysera, but those are incredibly difficult targets to remove without playing a Hex.
Yeah, and the other thing to note too here is that Lightning Storm in hand is not very valuable for Duke. And the longer it's there, the more likely it is that Central Florida can sniff that out. So when they go with this Hex here, they are opening themselves to what could potentially happen if the board gets cleared, is have one of those giant follow-up threats. So if they utilize the Lightning Storm here and utilize the Healing Totem to do the rest of the job on that Ragnaros, they get to keep that Hex, and they do sacrifice some damage on board, but what do they really sacrifice from it? This is a much more aggressive play where they're looking at ending the game because they have Spirit Claws and they have such a massive lead, and I can't fault them for that either. But they did have an option to slow this game down and continue the grind.
Right. I mean, they were in a very safe position, and they've been playing towards a win condition that just takes time, right? As the turns progress, with a Thunderbluff Valiant in play, slowly but surely, they get better and better trades, and eventually they win the game by attrition. Whereas Central Florida, in this position, unfortunately, has to think very carefully about how they're going to answer the board. The top deck Mass Dispel is a great way for them to get back into this game.
They certainly shut off the power from the Thunderbluff Valiant and the totem power that's on board, but they're still facing down 8 damage. And this is what I was talking about with this card. It either looks like it is incredible, or you wonder why it's in the build. If they can manage to stabilize because of that, they'll look brilliant. And with the Chillmaw in hand, that possibility is there. But this turn, otherwise, still very weak.
Right, and on a subsequent turn now, going into turn 10, even the ability to play the Blackwing Corruptor and the Holy Nova basically means they're going to be able to clear the board. They'll reduce the risk of losing to a Bloodlust or additional buffs. That's a lot of threat, though. Lightning Bolt coming down. If they roll into... Well, they can't roll into a new Wrath of Air totem.
That's right.
That's going to be a huge problem from this position.
You cannot have the Shaman Hero Power summon a totem that is currently on board. The Wrath of Air totem, it's effectively dead, but it's still there.
And unless they have some way to activate it with a Flame Tongue or a Bloodlust in an upcoming turn, they're never going to be able to get spell power.
Wow.
That's a real problem here.
And like you mentioned, they gave up their Hex. Now the thing about it is Chillmaw's only doing 3 damage to the board. So if Duke pushes through with just damage, they're still home free with 10 power out here. So Central Florida still needs some help in this spot. Second Holy Nova would look pretty darn good.
I mean, I think they're still in the position where Corruptor on the thing from below and Holy Nova is the only way that they survive the upcoming turn, and that's totally predicated on no follow-up. If
they're
the
desperate.
Alone
they're doing the desperate dig for a dragon here, and it's not there. The Chillmaw also, notably, there's no other dragon in hand, so in order to get the Chillmaw active, they have to get another dragon in their hand. And I think that's what they're headed for when they play the Netherspite Historian. But with the damage Duke has in hand, Spirit Claws, Lightning Storms, Lightning Bolt, that Chillmaw actually will not clear any of the minions on board, and Duke should be taking a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, and now the Azure Drake in hand, they have the activator for spell power if they need it. This looks like it's a done deal. The damage is there. Duke just has to count it out. You can see them doing the math on your screen right now.
Everyone here has come up with 3 different totals when you count this quickly. I know this from experience. You go, it's 14. You're like, no, someone's like, nah, it's 17. And then the other person's like, I only count 11. You're like, 11? We don't even have any multiples of that.
And which is the correct way to remove it and in what order. But regardless,
Duke here doesn't matter. 2-0 lead for Duke at this point. The Priest is struggling in this set.
Yeah, Central Florida, I mean, strategically at this point in the Conquest set, you continue to play the Priest because you have to win with it either way. If they go to a different deck, they're going to be forced back into playing this Priest deck against the next deck they play against no matter what. So they need to be able to beat, they need to win against Duke with this last deck with that Priest deck no matter what they do.
And at this point, it's just redemption. I mean, you've done 2 games with it. It hasn't performed. They got to prove it.
Right, and they've committed every week to some kind of tech. We saw last week they brought that Murloc Paladin. They really do seem to favor those kind of wonky off-meta control decks, hoping that their opponents won't know how to play around them or maybe won't see some of those tech choices. This has put them in a position where their back is against the wall.
Yeah, and these guys, no slouch up to this point, too. 4-0 in match record with a 12-6 overall game record. So these tech choices they've been going with have been performing as well. So that's something really interesting to note. Is Central Florida a victim of the draws this time, or is Central Florida a victim of their own deck building? You know, eventually you keep playing off-meta decks. There's a reason they are off-meta decks. It's because the meta decks are incredibly strong decks.
Right. The control classes as a whole, generally, you get punished for seeing your late game early in the game. And that has been sort of a consistent theme with this Priest deck so far. Ragnaros early on, Ysera early on, Chilmaw early on. There's been pros and cons to that, but at the end of the day, I think that's what's losing them the game.
It definitely could be. Game number 3. Something's got to give here. The other thing, too, is they could just be relaxing a bit. The fact that they've qualified for the playoffs.
Right.
Just go, hey,
they
you know
are
what?
going through no matter what here.
Yeah, let's have some fun this week.
And you know what? This is interesting, actually. So they do actually elect to move back to their Warlock deck.
Was that a sacrificial pact I just saw, Kevin?
I think it was.
They threw back a sacrificial pact versus a Warlock deck?
It depends what kind of Warlock deck you're expecting, I guess. That's.
I think Imp Gang Boss is always there.
It's true. I mean, that's an interesting decision. This is definitely.
Whoa. I have never seen a build like this before. What is going on? Sacrificial Pact's in here, Hellfire's in here, Darkshire Councilman, Natural Mortal Coil. I mean, it almost looks like a Zoo deck, but not quite.
No, there's absolutely something else going on here. You know for a fact that Duke is clearly playing a much faster Warlock, likely with Malcazar's Imp in there. That's got to be a discard.
Oh, yeah. This is a discard Zootlock.
Right, so they're going to move very quickly, and Infested Tor and a Siphon Soul.
This is some sort of Reno N'Zoth build.
It has to be. It has to be. There's no other reason you run that many off-meta, one-off cards.
You can just see the smile in his hand, too. He's like, oh, yeah, we threw back Sacrificial Pact. Ah, dang it. Forgot about that. Duke off to a not-so-subtle start. Of course, Zoo Warlock wants to get on the ground running and then try to punish any susceptible plays from the opponent. Central Florida, not really too susceptible to them with that Imp Gang Boss. That is a nightmare right now for Duke.
Yeah, I mean, Central Florida is going to be able to do a lot of work here. They've got really nice follow-up turns available to them. Peddler into a 1-drop on turn 3 is a totally acceptable play, and it just allows them to think more about how they want to answer whatever Duke is able to add to the board on 3.
Yeah, it's kind of cool interaction with the slower build that has Darkshire Councilman and Imp Gang Boss in it. You can start buffing up that Darkshire Councilman while you're playing defensively.
Right, so I mean, in this position now, Central Florida also is in no point worried about what's coming down because they know they've got the ability at any time to hit Hellfire and reset the board if they need to.
Bane of Doom gets drawn.
I haven't seen a Bane of Doom in years.
The last time I saw Bane of Doom, I believe my opponent got a Mal'Ganis from it.
Yeah, and that's been a long time.
And then I quickly played that card and got many Blood Imps from it and disenchanted it.
It's not a bad card. In actuality, at this point, the number of demons that are available that are very powerful for it to summon because of the synergies makes it an interesting and viable choice. But it's definitely, I mean, if anything in this deck list has told me this is a Reno list, it's Bane of Doom.
Not the Siphon Soul or the Infested Torrent or the Sacrificial Pact. It's everything together. That Bane of Doom to me seals it that this is some sort of Reno build. I definitely agree with you there. But Bane of Doom, this is a card that is very slow. It's hard to activate. But Central Florida this is the kind of curve they were looking for in games 1 and 2, where they have minions to contest early on, and then they get to follow that up. This game, they have that early game, and they have the follow-up. I think they're looking to take the win here, and I don't mean to call games early, but my gosh, how is Duke going to push through this?
I mean, Duke has a real challenge on their hands here in the sense that regardless of what they do, because all of their removal up to this point has to be minion-based, they're going to give value to their opponent's Darkshire Councilman. They're going to spawn additional minions on the board. This is a risk. No matter how they play it, they're taking risks.
The other thing, too, is that Central Florida's deck so far has just looked like a zoo deck. Nothing in here indicates this kind of hand range.
And then they top-decked a Dread Seed.
Nothing in here tells Duke that this is what it is right now. Duke is playing this like it's a zoo game.
Right, they've absolutely hidden everything they're doing. And, I mean, Central Florida is on screen very happy about the ability to have this stuff come down in the order it's come down. Now, the follow-up here, do you put the Dreadsteed on the board and really start to advertise what you're doing because of the enormous synergy potential with the Darkshire Councilman?
Yeah, I think this turn you're giving up what your deck is either way. But at this point for Duke, I feel like it might be too late. The lead for Central Florida here is just going to be nigh insurmountable. I mean, they're rolling into Bane of Doom. They're rolling into Siphon Soul. They have backup with Hellfire and ways to reload with Dark Peddler and the Infested Tauren to stop the buck. Everything for Central Florida is going right.
And Duke, unfortunately, because they had the discard synergy in hand early on, has elected not to life tap. They've dug for no additional resources. So as the turns progress, if they don't start to life tap aggressively, they are going to exhaust their in-hand resources and be left in a position where they simply do not have the answers required to get back in this game.
Yeah. This looks like it's aimed at Infested Tauren this turn and set up a 2-turn kill onto this Darkshire Councilman here. Defender of Argus, not really much help. Still a strong card, but Duke, they are going to run into some surprises very soon. And that Infested Tauren, that is a big sign that says what is going on.
It's the first of many of the problems that they're going to have to deal with, and they're going to just try and gamble here, it looks like, on the Knife Juggler, hoping like crazy that they can pick off this Darkshire Councilman.
Yep, 2 33% shots here to actually take out the Darkshire Councilman. If they manage to catch the Slime token, an additional chance to wipe out a minion. So still a 33% chance. Overall, I believe it's 55. If you have 2 33% chances, don't hold me to that. I'm not a math major.
Regardless, they did not get the outcome they were looking for.
That was actually one of the worst outcomes they could have possibly had, was dealing only single damage to face and then setting up the 2-2 to a 2-1, which is probably slated to kill that Knife Juggler anyway.
Now, at this point, if you're Central Florida, you've got so many really interesting options. That Sacrificial Pact is... That card exists only because Handlock Mirrors used to be a thing.
I mean, Central Florida's got all the options here. Yeah, that's destroy a demon, not destroy one of your demons to restore that 5 health. So that Malchezaar Zimp, definitely one they could hit. But honestly, at this point, they might just hold it, because one of the only ways I see them losing this game is Doomguard getting out of control. If they just wait and pick off a Doomguard with that Sacrificial Pact, the game is basically over.
I mean, they have to think a little bit here that there's a lot of power on the board. Playing the Bane of Doom could work out very well for them. They don't necessarily want to throw away the Hellfire. Yeah, this is
when you get an opportunity, utilize it.
Not what you wanted. Not what you wanted. It's not the outcome they were hoping for. The Abusive Sergeant in hand means there's an easy answer to this for Duke.
And this is the state that Central Florida is going to succeed the most in, is once they've gotten past the early hump to a safe position, Duke's deck is loaded with low-cost cards that are meant to create early-game consistency. As the game progresses, they will continue to draw lots of these, and as a result, struggle versus the higher-end cards from Central Florida.
Right. Central Florida just has too many answers available, and that's going to come back to haunt them because Duke is, for better or for worse, forced in a lot of ways to dump their hand here. They need to get on the board and threaten damage.
Hellfire Dark Peddler. And say goodbye to the board. Central Florida has turned the corner. And it'll take a while, but we're likely going to Game 4 here.
You know what, and I'm really excited for that. Central Florida finally really getting some enormous payoff from the incredible tech decisions that they've made. Both of these decks, the Dragon Priest and now the Reno N'Zoth Sacrificial Pact Warlock. I don't even know what to call this. It's a phenomenal opportunity for them to just put some threats out there, and they haven't actually telegraphed a lot of the tech in this deck on the off chance.
You know, I always speak too soon here. Like every single time I'm like, yeah, Zoo's done. Now, how about just life tap into Soulfire and get the Silverware Golem, flame him. Solid turn for Duke. And Central Florida, if they can manage to stall this out for just a couple more turns, they got it, but still a road.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they've still got such an incredible life total, right? They're still on 24 health. There's nothing Duke can do in the next couple of turns to really threaten that, and they're aggressively life tapping their own health away. I mean, right now, Central Florida just wins on attrition.
Yeah, definitely. And this, like I said, Duke doesn't have these the high-end threats. Central Florida's got them covered.
Yeah,
it takes some time, but
even the simple Dreadsteed on the board that they can never clear, because I guarantee you they run no silences, that's probably enough of a problem on its own.
They can sacrificial pack their own Jiraxis.
That's maybe a bold strategy, Cotton, but I'm looking right now at the ability to power overwhelming this Dreadsteed, go face for a whole bunch of damage, and Void Terror that power overwhelming Dreadsteed. That's a lot of threat. They're not at any risk of dying at 19 health right now.
I was a little bit curious that they took the power overwhelming over the Shifter Xeris, but now that you mentioned the Void Terror, you know, it's just been so long since that card has been in play. We're talking Haunted Creeper Nerubian Egg days. This is really strong. I mean, that is an 8-5 that they're making thanks to that power overwhelming.
And they're playing it safe. They are the control deck here, so they're electing to say, you know what, we'll take that trade. You can see on Duke's face, they're going, are you kidding me right now? Did that just happen?
Yeah, that just happened, Duke. And there's the train of one drops with no Doomguard back behind it.
Get it out! Get it out!
Yeah, this one's going to get closed out, and Duke knows that. I mean, There's a reason you hold Malchezaar's Imp and the Flame Imp back at this point.
It's like a mid-range Warlock deck. We thought it was Reno, but that's the second Huge Toe. It's the second Darkshire Councilman.
Well, and Jiraxis, too. I mean, you don't necessarily play Jiraxis in a Reno deck because that's
I have no
a
time
very
for
awkward
games.
reset to make late in the game, looking for one or the other, but not both.
Good old Dreadsteed.
This is so bizarre, and it makes me very happy. You could even just sacrificial pack the Dreadsteed here as a way to guarantee that there's nothing, not that there's like an outcome for 17 damage in one turn from 5 cards.
Yeah, it would have to be Leroy Power Soulfire. That's 18 damage.
And that's clearly not going to happen. We've already seen some of the cards necessary to make that happen, so.
Duke forced to scoop it up.
Central Florida deserves that win. That was an incredible deck, and I'm going to look this up later because I want that deck list.
It's definitely a Kevin-style deck if I've ever seen one. That game reminded me of sitting in traffic for a really long time, and the exit's like right there. And you know it's happening, it just takes forever to actually get there. That game was over on like turn 5.
Right. I mean, it's been done for a long time. They were in a commanding position just by virtue of the mulligan alone, and then proceeded to just take their time and kind of play with their food a little bit before they ate it.
The lion hunting the gazelle in the nature channel, and you can't look away once the lion's actually eating the gazelle.
It's almost too much, but it was a lot of fun.
Maybe a bit of a graphic description there for me. So, on the board now for Central Florida, Mage and Priest left to work with. And last week, they brought Freeze Mage. And if they brought Freeze Mage this week, one of its best matchups is Zoo Warlock.
Right. Freeze Mage and Zoo is one of the most authoritative matchups. Like, you have to get all of the right cards in the right order as Zoo, and basically bank on your opponent not having any of the necessary things early on in Freeze Mage to answer it.
See, that's the kicker to it. Not only does the Zoo have to have a really strong hand, they have to have the Freeze Mage player not have a strong hand. That's a difficult thing to do. That leads to those 25 to 30% style win rates that you look at with some of those matchups. You know, I look at back to America's prelims where Hot Meowth was playing Zoo versus Freeze Mage. He actually managed to, or maybe this, I think this is at Championships actually. I think he was versus Dude, who's competing with Washington, University of Washington in this one. He went for a Hail Mary play that was the only way to win, which was play a Doomguard into a Doomsayer with his board frozen and then life tap into the remaining damage to kill the Doomsayer. But it was literally the only way he could win. And that happened. But sort of the principle there is that had to happen in order to win the game. It's just, it is not a good matchup if that is Freeze Mage. But here we're rolling in with Priest, and the Priest deck is the one that has struggled, and with this opening hand from Duke, there's a chance that happens again, but one of the key cards in this matchup is already there.
Right, they've got that Wormrest Agent early on. They've also got the Netherspite Historian, so if they see an early dragon, There it is.
Wow, big draw.
That gives them the opportunity to activate everything they need to contest the early board. Even just the ability to follow up next turn with Power Word Shield and another Northern Destroyer Cleric would be an enormous swing turn, because the Zoo player cannot put enough power on the board to answer that.
Yeah, I'm curious if Duke sees this as a large enough threat to actually go for the Voidwalker in this spot. If they play Dark Peddler or Knife Juggler, the Knife Juggler is basically a strict sacrifice to this board position to try to snag a better turn later on. The Voidwalker, however, will keep the Flame It from being attacked. The rest of their hand texture is the problem, where they don't have necessarily the follow-up to get this done. If they go for Voidwalker here, they're looking for Dark Peddler into some sort of buff to answer the Wormrest Agent afterwards and try to snowball the board from there. If they go for anything else, I'm fearing for them.
Right, and the hand state being what it is, there's nothing they can get from the Dark Peddler this turn that cleanly sets up a subsequent turn. So no matter what they do, they are left in kind of an awkward position where, I mean, yes, maybe they draw a Soulfire, and it discards one of their Knife Jugglers, which is a key card for this particular style of Warlock.
Yeah. And honestly, it looks weird to play the 1-mana card instead of a 2-mana one, but they are thinking about that Dark Peddler next turn. Very, very strong from Duke here.
Right, but I mean, Central Florida, this is the game they've been looking for since they started running this priest deck. They drew all of the early game resources. They're going to be able to get this Wormrest Agent out of range, slam down this Twilight Whelp, and have just all of the power they need to contest this board for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Even the follow-up turns look really good. I mean, Northshire Cleric in hand, you're going to be able to cycle Netherspite Historian in hand, you're going to be able to draw into a new resource.
Yeah, Corruption, albeit an answer, not necessarily the one they were looking for. This is a delayed answer that will give Duke plenty of time to get some value from this board, but something's better than nothing here. If they didn't pick up a way to clear this Wormrest Agent, they were in a lot of trouble. Now, I'd say it's a much lower disadvantage than they would have been otherwise.
Well, and look at Central Florida's follow-up here. I mean, they have the second Wormrest Agent available. They also just top-decked the Twilight Guardian. Like, they're at no risk of getting punished here. They're going to have an aggressive board state that there's not enough resources in Zoo for them to answer.
Weird. They're going to choose to actually just take their card right away. And I'm a little bit surprised at that, because like you were just mentioning, their hand is so strong. I'm not sure they actually need the extra card here. Sacrificing that board development means they'll have less options to clear out what Duke's going to play in the coming turns. Again, Duke's not playing a strong reactive deck. They get on the board, they start dealing damage. The less development that Central Florida has, the more they can struggle with potential turns like this one.
Right, it does feel a little awkward if you are in Central Florida's position with no removal cards in hand to have any way to follow up now. Like no Holy Nova, no mass removal. They're now actually on the back foot despite everything. Maybe they choose here to just develop the Twilight Guardian. I actually think I like the idea of getting the 2-drops down just to have the additional bodies more than anything, because I think it gives them more efficient trades.
Yeah, like this turn is still very strong from them, but imagine if they had just played an extra minion last turn.
Yeah, that second 2-drop.
Duke wouldn't have a board right now.
Oh yeah, the second 2-drop was absolutely going to allow them to just never be in any kind of danger. Instead, they're now left in this really, frankly, the ugliest possible position where, again with this heal,
This is really interesting. So Central Florida very clearly is focused on a value plan here, where they feel that the best way to approach this is to choke out Duke's resources. If that doesn't work, they're in a heap of trouble.
I mean, they do have really good follow-up turns available. Even just seeing the Blackring Corruptor, I mean, they know they've got options, they know they've got outs, but this doesn't feel like it's the safest play. It feels like they're overvaluing trades, and that's not the juggle they were looking for. This is
one more to go if they want to play this Malkazar Zimp. I think I like the Malkazar Zimp here because the Direwolf Alpha and the Knife Juggler are already priority threats. If your opponent's got multiple things on board that can contest this, you know, they can only kill one of them or so. Duke all smiles as they miss both juggles onto the Wormrest Agent. Again, 233% chances. It's slightly favorable, but now look at the board state.
Yeah, I mean, Central Florida could have gotten punished, absolutely, for their choices. At this point, they've gotten very lucky. Duke has some power left in hand. There is a decent follow-up turn with the Doom Guard available, especially if they leave Malkazar's Imp alive. I feel like Central Florida now is basically in the driver's seat. Blackring Corruptor into Bookworm is so much removal, I don't think that there's any way for Duke to claw back into this.
It doesn't look like it to me. All that healing looked like it's very liable to pay off. Of course, the Doomguard could be a bit awkward here. That is the one kicker to this, is a Doomguard could manage to get some strict value here. It's going to run away with it. And that Possessed Villager 100% will spell the Doomguard here. But it is slim pickings from here.
Right, and even in this position, I mean, with only 2 health left, Central Florida does have the ability to answer that. Even the Twilight Guardian, frankly, at this point, is going to be enough to let them kind of stay in the game. I kind of expect to see the Netherspite Historian come down just so they know what they have available to them for options. But that's, either way, there's nothing available for Duke for follow-up. And best case scenario, they life tap into all of just the right cards, but they're never playing more than 2 cards a turn from this point out unless they get exactly the right draws.
Yeah. Second Doomguard here is exactly what they're looking for as well. Without a second Doomguard, they will definitely struggle. And it's already struggled. Central Florida is still at 30. So, not necessarily getting the job done here. I like the Bookworm this turn. I think it's the hardest card in the hand to use at the moment, and that 3/6 body on board can do some work.
Flame Imp, one of the worst cards to see at this stage of the game. They don't really want to have that self-damage Battlecry come into play, and it's not enough power to really do a lot on the board. They basically need to dump their hand here. I don't think they have a choice.
Yeah, every turn for Duke, it's continue the assault and hope that these guys are enough to get through. And looks like a trade was slated.
Yeah, they are going to choose to take that Bookworm out of play. I don't know if that's the correct decision because it doesn't play to their outs, but now Holy Nova in hand, I mean, this is the point at which Central Florida knows they have this game stitched up. They just have to decide how they're going to get to the finish line.
I totally agree with that. I think Duke's plan here is to hope that 2 cards a turn can eventually grind Central Florida down to just a weak turn eventually. You know, if you keep going, if you're drawing 2 cards a turn for the next 5 turns, your opponent's drawing 1, you can trade your way back into the game. It's very difficult, but that long shot out, perhaps a little bit more than trying to push damage at this point due to Central Florida having 0 damage on them.
Unfortunately, though, for Duke, finally, Central Florida is going to get the payoffs from having those big top-end minions because being able to play Chillmaw, Ragnaros, etc., like they're going to put down threats that the Warlock player cannot answer. There's nothing in a Zoo-style deck that can do anything about that.
I think we would like to see the Chillmaw here. Chillmaw is really awkward for Duke. So either one of 2 things happen. Number 1, they cannot kill the Chillmaw because they don't have 6 power on board. Number 2, they get 6 power by playing a minion, which will likely die to Chillmaw. So this is a really awkward turn for Duke. And it's kind of a replay of last game where Central Florida turned the corner, and it takes a while to close, but
yeah, it's going to get closed, and these are not the options off of the Dark Peddler that you wanted to see as the Warlock player to have a chance to get back into this game. For better or for worse, this looks to me like we are probably going to see Duke get punished for not having any way to threaten damage against the early board from Central Florida. And Central Florida on a really nice tear here. If they get this win and they get to queue into one of the most decisive matchups in the entirety of Hearthstone right now, Freeze Mage against Zoo, that may mean they actually climb their way back and get the reverse sweep.
Yeah, I mean, these decks are definitely targeted at fighting against Zoo decks. There's no question about that. Is their self-Shaman ban going to look brilliant at the end of this day?
It certainly looks that way right now. Definitely a couple of tough trades there. They're valuing this Darkshire Councilman, but there's so much power in hand here for Central Florida. They've got so many ways to make this a very, very clean set of removal turns. They can choose to trade the Blackwing Technician into the Peddler, play the Holy Nova, and leave almost nothing on board. They can play Ragnaros and simply look to remove a threat or threaten a 2-turn lethal. That's the direction it looks like they're going to go.
What you're telling me is they can kind of close their eyes and click buttons and probably walk away with this one.
Yeah, they've decided that those Warlock minions look a lot like insects. Duke can actually answer this Ragnaros now. They have the ability to kill it, but that's the fact they have to trade. The only way they have right now to actually threaten decent damage into the Ragnaros, there's no out to play to.
Yeah, like look, just look.
Yeah,
there you go.
You're floating 5 mana on turn 9 as a Warlock player. Like, you can see it on their faces. They're kind of going, you know what? Like, this is probably done. We had a good run.
I'm looking forward to a Nozdormu victory. Dang it.
It would have been more fun.
Settle for Azure Drake.
Settle for Azure Drake.
I guess it's a good card.
Pretty okay. Pretty okay. So they've got
Staple of Hearthstone.
most played card in the world, no questions asked. Imp into Doomguard is actually basically the best possible outcome.
If I'm Duke here, I am life tapping prior to playing the Doomguard.
to get that second draw, I mean,
Well, to get the Silverware Golem, get it into play, and then draw it. So if they draw Silverware Golem here, all right, right play.
yeah, it worked out for them. But unfortunately, even with all of this, how do they possibly continue through this game? I mean, they're not going to threaten any kind of damage.
Is that a Shadow Death? Oh, okay.
Almost, not quite. But like Chillmaw alone right now is the answer. They can play Chillmaw and just wait.
Now that being said, Duke has kind of run them out of minions after that Chillmaw. The Chillmaw gets swept up on board. If Duke just keeps drawing minions in Central Florida, just doesn't draw action, maybe they get some repetitive damage through.
I mean, it's very possible for them to put some heat on the Priest player, but you know there's still removal behind this. We have yet to see either the Shadow Word Horror or the Holy Nova. You've never seen the Master Spell. Like, there's a lot of things left in Central Florida's deck to come back, and they're not... 7 power on the board for Duke doesn't scare Central Florida. They're looking at minimum, like a 4-turn clock, even with the additional resources coming out of Duke's deck. I think they feel very safe.
All right, they gotta. I wonder how many cards are left in that build. Ooh.
Do you value the additional draw enough to life tap here? I don't think you can. I think they might actually be scared of running out of cards themselves.
So 13 cards for Central Florida and 11 for Duke. So still plenty of play left. My curiosity is where this Soulfire aims. So if you point it at the Blackwing Technician, now that's curious. So if they had pointed Soulfire at the Blackwing Technician and traded in the Doomguard here, this would have been a full board clear for them, and then they life tap into Darkshire Councilman afterwards.
I mean, I think they still clear the board here by trading into Chillmaw, using the Darkshire Councilman, and then Soulfiring the Blackwing Technician to remove it.
So many possibilities.
It's still
Yeah,
going to be
that
an
works
empty
too.
board when this is done.
Yeah.
It's just very, very awkward.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it just looks like a weird order to me. I guess if they draw a weak card, which is what they anticipate, they get to discard the weak card and try to dig for something else. They're just trying to get stuff out of the way that way, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, they're actually not going to Soulfire here.
And that's Shadow Word Pain now is the game in its entirety. That takes care of the last serious threat from Duke. You can see it, you know, they're definitely not impressed with this outcome. But yeah, they're just going to take their time now, I guess. See if this...
Duke, I bet, is just concealing how many Soulfires they have. They played one already, is that correct? For the...
Yes, we've seen the first one already, so now they're just trying to hold this second one back.
Oh, never mind. I literally thought they were trying to hold on to it.
I don't think there's anything left for them to draw into. I mean, you've seen both Doomguards. Everything else in this deck is going to be lower cost than that. So at this point, they never get to a place where they can actually threaten damage on board.
Central Florida is just literally pulling every card Duke plays. Why don't they just fatigue them? They just don't attack anymore.
I mean, I think we have like a gentleman's agreement in Hearthstone that you don't do that. You don't fatigue as you do.
Oh, see, I always felt the gentleman's agreement was anytime you have the opportunity to fatigue, you do so because it's what everyone really wants to see. Is completely grind the other person into dust in the wind. Game 5. Central Florida has brought this back. I'll tell you what, these decks are strong versus Zoo.
This is a crazy technical choice. I mean, I really did not think that giving up your own Shaman in this position could have been the right decision, but on reflection, it looks like it may have been.
Shaman would have struggled versus a couple of these decks. Shaman wouldn't
was
have
gonna
had
be a tough choice.
that same style of play versus Zoo. It doesn't really have that liberty. Now that we're here, if this is Freeze Mage,
It's 100%. It's going to come down to what kind of mage this is. I mean, if it's a tempo mage,
I thought you
we've
were
got a
saying it's
game.
100% a Freeze Mage, and I was like,
No.
Kevin's got the read.
I wish.
Kevin's got the read.
If they're running tempo mage, then we've got a game on our hands. If
Yeah.
they're running freeze mage, we're going to know very early on who's in the driver's seat in
Yeah,
this game.
exactly. That's the thing to look out for. If this is Tempo Mage, it's back and forth. If this is Freeze Mage, there's going to need some magic on Duke's side to pull this out. We're talking Doomsayer and Frost Nova completely wipe out so many board positions from aggressive Zoo decks
I mean, if Duke pulls this off, all those kids should be running straight out and buying lottery tickets.
And it's Freeze Mage.
Yeah, Ice Barrier alone tells you what you need to know there, and this is probably a very, very nice looking start for Duke. I think in some respects you kind of want to take the risk and have that Silverware Golem and the Darkshire Librarian together in hand, because just getting lucky on sequencing here and hitting that Golem could actually allow them to put damage out before Central Florida gets to that key sort of turn 5 range where they can actually start to clear the board.
Now that being said, I would have liked to see them keep the Knife Juggler as well. Knife Juggler is an incredibly strong threat versus Freeze Mage because of its extra damage output. If that card sticks to the board, every single minion you play is another point of damage. And while it's not quite the same scaling as Darkshire Councilman, it's certainly something to think about. But here their game plan is basically to have the fortunate side of the rolls come out for them. And this is really smart because against a tough matchup, you're going to have something go your way that is a little bit outside of your control for this to work. So we're looking at potentially throwing Malchezaar Zip here into Darkshire Librarian. If they wanted to really push those chances, they coin out the Abusive Sergeant, hope that the Silverware Golem finds its way to play.
I mean, I don't think you coin out the Abusive Sergeant just because it telegraphs what you're doing so openly.
No, this turn's Malchezaar Zip. Next turn, get that 2 damage.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. All right, that makes a lot of sense. And interesting to note, too, as well, Central Florida, they're running Evolved Cobalt. So this is the really, really fast burning version of Freeze Mage, where they can actually end the game from just a single tick off of an Emperor Thorson. They don't need the full Alex Straza combo. They've got lots of time to just build up pure damage.
Yeah, this is a build that I've seen Laughing play a lot lately, is with the Evolved Kobold, where it's so often in the end game, it acts as an 8 damage burn spell, because you just couple it with Frost Bolts and with Ice Lances and with a Roaring Torch from your hand or something. Just a lot of burst, and it's burst that is mostly ended at both ending these games in a spot where you'd normally continue to play defensively and to surprise control decks with the additional burst.
Right, and you're looking right now, too, at a Central Florida that is going to be desperately fishing for additional damage and ways to kind of clear this board, because they don't have a Frost Nova, they don't have a Blizzard. They've got a bunch of burn and not a whole lot of ways to actually answer the board from their opponent. They probably need to play Accolade of Pain here. They need to get that additional draw available to them, but they've got to play scared because there's a lot of very, very early minions coming down very fast.
Yeah, I think Accolade of Pain is definitely slated here. Something that's really interesting to note is that Central Florida, I think, can start to piece together a little bit of this hand range. I think if there was Imp Gang Boss or Darkshire Councilman, those would have both immediately found their way to the board. And if those aren't there, what's the rest of Duke's hand? Well, it's not Flame Imp, because Flame Imp very clearly would have been played. They can almost piece it together to something that looks very similar to this, where you're looking at Defender of Argus or Silverware Golem, Power Overwhelming, maybe Doomguard in the hand. And so this turn, I think they get a lot of information about what Duke's been holding on to. And in this spot, Duke has got to go for it. This is Power Overwhelming, this is Flame Imp, this is Coin Darkshire Librarian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Duke knows that the first serious removal turn in Freeze Mage is turn 5. And they're at a place right now where they can push a lot of damage, they can clear the board, and they can put down basically an entire board. They need to take risks, right? That's the only way they're coming out of this game, is by taking risks. And I think you can see it in their sequencing already. They know that this is the only possible way for them to actually get into this game. Pyroblast.
Yeah, there's definitely a Pyroblast in there. I've seen that tech floating around on the Twitterverse recently as well, but this is the strongest start that Duke could have had, and Crazed Alchemist, one of the tech choices to try to answer Doomsayer.
That's an enormous pickup. I mean, that is literally the one card that may decisively allow them to actually contest the board here. And Central Florida, I mean, that's a lot of power on board. You're looking at 11 damage next turn. You're on a 3-turn clock if you don't answer this board.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was the opening that Duke could have had to put Central Florida to the test. It's very rare that Zoo can get this much out by turn 4. This was the nightmare.
And Central Florida now, I think, for better or for worse, as much as they probably want to kind of lay back, they want to maybe expend the Frost Bolt and use a hero power, like, they got to think very seriously about how to value not removal, but this burn is now removal. Like, that's the only way to play the game now.
Yeah, they're going to choose to hero power off the Possessed Villager token. This was a really interesting turn, too. Central Florida had an opportunity to set this up where they put the damage into the Flame Imp, take the 1 extra this turn, and then next turn use Forgotten Torch on the Darkshire Librarian and put the 2nd hero power into the Flame Imp and wipe out extra power that way. They chose to do it this way, and I'm guessing it's because they wanted to Ice Barrier this turn. So I don't really blame them for that. But the thing about it here is now I'm looking at this Doomsayer and wondering if this is a play that is going to be intended to gain them additional health by sacrificing it to the board state, or if they're going to wait to try to couple this with a freeze.
I mean, I think they have to, and I think they've also just openly, with this hero power, telegraphed the upcoming Blizzard on turn 6.
Yeah.
You know, Duke is just going to rush to push as much damage as possible. They probably need to dig a little bit in their deck right now and find some additional options for the subsequent turn, knowing that they're going to be able to do very little. And that Doomguard, well, this is a scary, scary thing. I mean, Duke, after all the things we said about how definitive this matchup should be, Duke actually gets everything they need to swing this back in their favor and openly make this a game that they could actually close out before Central Florida finds the pieces they need.
And a lot of that just came down to their mulligan stage. They kept the Darkshire Librarian. They kept the Silverware Golem. They knew that it's an unfavorable matchup, and as a result, took risks. That is brilliant play from Duke. That is the way that you win unfavorable matchups, is by taking more risks than you usually do.
And honestly, committing to the board here feels really good because the Doomguard, unfortunately, they actually have to think very carefully about playing because that Crazed Alchemist represents the best answer they have to the upcoming threat of a Doomsayer. And if you're Duke, I mean, that's the one thing you're worried about losing the game to right now, is that Doomsayer coming down on a really scary combo turn. Having said that, Silverware Golem in hand, I mean, do you just go all in and hope like crazy that the Doomguard hits the Knife Juggler and the Silverware Golem?
I think at this point, when Central Florida hasn't showed a Frost Nova Doomsayer, you are now discounting Doomsayer as a legitimate threat. The Crazed Alchemist is meant to be that tech on the turn where Frost Nova Doomsayer happens. You Crazed Alchemist and it wins you the game a lot. Here, they've drawn Silverware Golem. They have Doomguard. The problem with this hand is that Crazed Alchemist does still represent something strong, and Knife Juggler always represents something strong against this build. So here I think they're actually just free to develop the Silverware Golem and say, do you have another board sweep to Central Florida?
Right, and if there's no Flame Strike here, then this is the position where now Central Florida is, they're doing the math. They're looking at that developed Darkshire Councilman who's continuing to gain attack value every turn and saying, we may actually be at risk of dying here. You probably have to think about that Forgotten Torch clearing the Darkshire Councilman as the only way that you survive a single upcoming turn. Not into further turns beyond that, but literally one more turn just to stay in this game.
Yeah, I'm curious. This is a spot where I think I'd like to see the Doomsayers come down together. And there's not 14 power on board from Duke. So this is one of two things that's going to happen from Central Florida's perspective. Number one, they're taking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're taking 8 damage and clearing the board. Or number two, Duke has all the answers in the world, and they probably were done so anyway.
Right, and at this point, I mean, that Crazed Alchemist is, like you said, that was the game right there. Now, against all odds, yeah, you can see Central Florida, the reaction there. There was some jaws agape. This is probably a lost game now for Central Florida. I don't think there's anything they can draw into here that keeps them alive. 2 Ice Lances doesn't actually prevent enough damage to keep them alive.
They'd have to expend both of them and then have Alex Straza hit defensively. Would that ever be enough?
It still isn't, and I mean, Knife Juggles alone could be enough to end the game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Observe and reflect.
Ice Lance, I mean, what could they draw afterwards? Jeez.
They need the first ice block.
And
they need to see an ice block, and they've got no draw.
That's the other thing, too, is the Acolyte of Pain being attacked by Duke for that 5 points of damage. They didn't say, let's just push as much damage as we can. They said, let's deny the draws from Central Florida. Our hand is very strong. If they stumble, we could push ahead. And now at this point, anything is going to end this. If they draw anything that they can play, it's over. Duke wins the tough matchup with a strong opening draw and is going to take this set 3 games to 2.
What an insane series. I mean, they know now, just seeing that Peddler come down, the math is done, and they are aware that despite all odds, having brought basically the best possible lineup to counter Zoo, they're going to be punished by an incredible mulligan, the exact right outcomes. They look like they're going all the way to the top. They think this is definitely a big win, and the excitement is palpable.
Yeah, I got to agree with you on this one, too. I mean, if you build a lineup to target something, it is really important to be winning a game elsewhere sometimes. Because even if you have 3 matchups that say you're 65% favored, that same thing run 3 times in a row, you are still unfavored for the series. The idea is that those decks that you're building also have win rates versus the other ones. So when they fall into the position where they have to win 3 games to 0, they still have a strong chance, but still a little bit unlikely, and that's what the outcome ended up being here.
And you know what? I think you actually saw that in the Freeze Mage tech. You think about the Evolved Kobold, you think about the Pyroblast. There were a lot of answers there that said, what if we accidentally run into Warrior? What happens if we're put in a position where we're not given an easy matchup like Zoo, but that tech specifically takes away from your Zoo matchup?
Well, I think I like the call personally. It's very strong versus Druid. Druid has been one of the most popular decks in the format given how strong it is. But there's no Druid on either side of the teams today. Last week we saw Central Florida brought Yogg Druid build. This time it was no Druid. So, Duke, 3 games to 2 now. 2 more matchups that are coming up today. And we'll get to those in just a second. Of course, we do want to encourage you guys to get out there and really show your school spirit for this one. You can visit us on Facebook or you can tweet at Team Tespa with this one. What did you think of the Priest build? I personally, not a favor of the Priest build. I know Kevin is going to love the Priest build off the wall meta.
Priest was a lot of fun. I'm going after them. I'm going to find them on Twitter and ask them for that Warlock deck, though.
Someone get out there and get Kevin that Priest list. We also want to take this time to thank those who have made this possible. Of course, we're powered by Twitch here at the studios in Burbank, but we also want to give a thanks to Gunnar and to Steel Series for help contributing to making these collegiate players' dreams come true. So first match in the books, but we got one more coming up for you. It's going to be the University of Connecticut taking on St. John's University. Don't go anywhere, guys. 2 more matches of Hearthstone coming up right after this.